Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Thursday morning lineup. I'm one of your hosts, Nina. We also have Rodney Allen Rippey and Jefferson, and we've got a special guest today. I'm super excited that he's here. I'm so glad he was able to take his time away from his busy schedule, which he'll tell you more about.
Well,
To be
thank you
with
for
us
inviting
today.
me. Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate the opportunity. Hello to everybody. Hello to Rodney. Last time I saw you, Rodney, I think it was a $6 million man.
Boy, it's been a while. Yes, sir.
You look the same. You mature well with time.
Well, God bless you. I feel good. It's good to be here with the rest of the team. And what an honor to be able to speak with you today.
No, the pleasure's all mine. I'm looking forward to the exchange.
So, y'all, this is K. Carl Smith, in case you couldn't figure that out by reading his name down there. And there's a lot I could say to introduce K. Carl about his credentials and his background, but I want to introduce him to you in a little bit of the same way that I first found out about him. I was at a freedom seminar, mainly with health freedom, but in general, a freedom liberty seminar a year ago, just about a year ago. And I thought there was only going to be one speaker. I had no idea there was going to be others. I'd never heard of K. Carl before. And he got up to speak. And from the first few minutes he started speaking, he was saying things that resonated with me and answering questions that I had long had about what I was seeing around me. So as soon as the whole seminar was over, I went out to his book table. I bought his book. I asked him to sign it for me. I've got it right here. As a matter of fact, there's K. Carl's book.
Wow.
And I asked him right then for contact information, knowing that someday I would hope to have him here so that we could talk more and hear more about his heart and his thoughts on these things. So I am super glad you are here. I've been waiting a long time for this. And I want to start with you were speaking. I remember one of the ways you introduced yourself is that you had been a politico schizophrenic.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. So can you tell us exactly what that means?
The word political schizophrenic is a phrase I developed to evaluate how I used to vote. And I grew up in Alabama, and I grew up as a staunch Democrat because based on family traditions. But I was voting that way not because of my values, but because of my family tradition. But by the way, my parents were staunch Republicans until '64. But that's another discussion. But a political schizophrenic, in terms of my self-evaluation, is a person that goes to church and worship with holy hands and praising God, but on voting Tuesday, you go and you vote the opposite of your worship. So you're politically crazy. And that's what I was doing. I really didn't think about it. I was voting based on family traditions, not based on values. And so with that, God pricked my heart and said, look, I can't trust you. So you're blocking your own blessings because I can't trust you. You're a political schizophrenic. You're praising me on Sunday with these holy hands, but on that Tuesday, come to vote with those same holy hands, you're voting, you're expressing the opposite of your worship. Therefore, I was a political schizophrenic.
I love that phrase, and I've noticed too. Something that comes up at my dinner table all the time is how our society these days seems to be redefining words.
Oh yes,
and as conservatives, we tend to just let it happen. Like woke used to be when my kid got up out of bed, he woke. Now, we got a whole new vocabulary. And K. Carl, I love how you yourself is saying, oh, enough of this. We're going to redefine certain things like like that type of political schizophrenia or even FDR.
You have to, because that's where the opposition, the left, are playing chess and conservatives back here playing checkers. Well, you're not going to win. You're being outmaneuvered before you get a chance to think about your move. So I don't like giving Saul Alinsky any credit, but he hit the nail on the head one time when he said, the one who controls the language will win the masses. And that's what's been happening. The left, they have demonized the word conservative. For example, if you tell somebody you're a conservative, you just admitted to them that you're a racist and you're an Uncle Tom, because the left has demonized that word. Huh?
Why is that, K. Carl? How did
Propaganda, negative propaganda.
And
see,
that was something I saw in your book that was an eye opener to me, because I lived through that era myself and had not been aware of that propaganda. So tell us what the propaganda was. How did this was a big question in my mind, and you answered it in that talk you gave. I had long wondered, how is it that the very people who were oppressed by a certain political party for over a century are now voting for them in a block?
Very, very good question. Very good question. And that's really the heart of my story. Just quickly, one time I was with a group of blacks. We were watching a football game, and these are my friends. They're all black Democrats, and the subject of politics came up. When I told them I was a conservative, the attacks began. They called me everything but a child of God. Uncle Tom, foot shuffler, the house N-word. Your parents must be disappointed in you. So I started thinking about, I said, why are they attacking me about this word? I knew about the negative propaganda, how the left has demonized the word and the conservatives' response has been weak or non-existent. But I've also done some history checking. Now, I don't have a PhD, but I've done some PhD level research I want to share with you. You got to go back to 1964. That's when, on July 2nd, that's when President Johnson signed the civil rights legislation into law. And you had your racist, Democrats, Dixiecrat, senators, primarily from the South. They filibustered the bill and they voted against it based on racist reasons. They didn't want integration. They wanted to maintain segregation. There was also a Republican senator from Arizona. He voted against it, not because he was a racist. Barry Goldwater voted against it based on constitutional grounds. As a matter of fact, Barry Goldwater was an integrationist. He, in 1946, he started the Arizona Air National Guard as an integrated unit before Truman integrated the armed forces in 48. Barry Goldwater in 1953 integrated the Senate cafeteria in our nation's capital when one of his black staffers was refused service. So Barry Goldwater was not a racist, and Dr. King even said that. But with his no vote, he sided with the racist Democrats, not for racist reasons, but for constitutional reasons. So here's the dots that I connected, and when I connect, I said, "Oh man, this is the answer." Do you recall Goldwater's nickname? His nickname was Mr. Conservative. And the title of the book he wrote in 1960 that sold over 3 million copies is entitled The Conscience of a Conservative. So at the Republican Party National Convention that was held at the Cal Palace in San Francisco, the Republican Party, the party of Lincoln, the party of emancipation, who do they nominate as their presidential candidate to run against LBJ, who signed the civil rights legislation? Mr. Conservative. When that happened, black folks left the Republican Party en masse. My parents was along that group. And that's when the word conservative and the word Republican Party started to become culturally ingrained, especially in the black community, to mean racism. And the Republican Party then started having the image of being anti-civil rights. So what happened, the Republican Party did an excellent job to make the Democrat Party look like heroes to black folks. That's when it happened. And don't forget, all of Dr. King lieutenants became Democrats, not Republicans. And when I read that, I said, oh my God, this is the answer. I grew up in Alabama, and I can remember when that happened in 64 with Goldwater. I remember hearing the word racist, conservative, and Goldwater being used in the same sentence. And that's when that word started to become culturally ingrained in the black community to mean racist, anti-civil rights. Black folks not going to vote for a racist. Matter of fact, black folks, this is my contention, we will vote or a devout socialist before we vote for someone we think is a racist. That's what's going on. We got to change the word. The word conservative doesn't work.
So,
Wow.
so what can we use?
What should we use is Frederick Douglass Republican in lieu of saying conservative. For example, to become a Frederick Douglass Republican is not based on your skin color. A Frederick Douglass Republican is a person who embraces what we call the life-empowering values of Douglass. These are the things that Douglass wrote about and he spoke about. Respect for the U.S. Constitution, respect for life, the belief in limited power of government, economic prosperity, free speech. Douglass wrote about parental and school choice. He wrote about the right of the people to keep and bear arms. He wrote about religious liberty. He wrote about immigration. All the things that's being attacked today, Frederick Douglass wrote about it. So if you believe in those life empowering values of Douglass, that's what makes you a Frederick Douglass Republican. It's not based on color, it's based on values. And we call them values because values unite, issues divide. And when you leverage the liberty message of a former slave, that resonates with people. Because how can you argue? How can you win an argument with a runaway slave about his love for liberty and his idea that these life empowering values are the tenets of liberty?
All right. So, K. Carl,
Wow.
got
We
another
be going now.
There's so much there.
I know there is so much there. So, got another question. The first thing you mentioned was that Frederick Douglass had a respect for the Constitution.
Yes.
But isn't the Constitution, read this in your book, isn't the Constitution the very document, or so say the left, that ensures it's a racist document because of the 3/5 rule?
Okay. Yeah. So when let me share this with you. When I became obsessed over the years with the writings of Douglass. So I grew up as a Democrat. So Rodney, I somebody sent me a quote one time where Douglass said, "I'm a Republican. I'm a black die in the wool Republican. I never intend to belong to any of the parties in the Party of Freedom and Progress." When I read, Rodney, that Douglass was a Republican, I said, wait a minute, Douglass was an Uncle Tom too?
Oh, yeah.
And why did Douglass say Freedom and Progress Republican Party and he did not say Freedom and Progress Democrat Party? That's when I went on a reading binge. I read everything that Douglass wrote. I read every biography in print at that time. And so to get to your question now, when Douglass escaped from slavery, he was not much of a reader. His mentor was William Lloyd Garrison, and he believed everything that William Lloyd Garrison and the Garrisonians told him and what they taught him. And what they taught him was that the Constitution was a pro-slavery document. Douglass believed that until Douglass did something very interesting. He sat down and read the Constitution for himself. And when he read, he said, wait a minute. Constitution is not a pro-slavery document. It's an anti-slavery document. The word slavery is not even in the Constitution. Then, so Douglass was going along with what everybody was saying. And they were talking about at that time, and still being taught today in colleges, that the 3/5 clause in the Constitution refers to the fact, they're saying, that blacks are 3/5 of a human being. Well, I was taught that in college. But Douglass gave clarity to that in 1861, March 26, when he was in Glasgow, Scotland. Actually, he was in a debate. When I read what Douglass said about the 3/5 clause, what he said was this. So in the Constitution, it says that for every 30,000 citizens, you get one congressional representation. So you had 4 million blacks enslaved in the South. And what the slave states wanted to do, they wanted to count every black person in slavery as one vote, so it would boost their congressional representation. So the Northern Free States said, no, if you free them, we'll let you count them as one person, one vote. But since you cannot free them, we're going to let you count the slaves in your state as 3/5 of representation. So in other words, a free person in a black person in a free state is worth 5/5 of a vote. A black person in a slave state is only worth 3/5 of a vote in terms of representation, not in terms of human. So when that happened, that cut the congressional representation of the slave states in half. They didn't have the majority like they wanted. So when I read this, I said, "Oh my God!" I went to historical black college. I went to Alabama A&M University. I wasn't
Mhm.
taught that. I was taught the total opposite.
Mhm.
And when I read
Mhm.
that, oh my goodness, what else is it I've been misled on? And that's why I
Mhm.
started going on reading binge to get into the writings of Douglass, not just the life of Douglass, but the writings of Douglass that turned my political thinking right side up. And so
Mhm.
that's what we've been doing for the past 12 years, going across the country, sharing Douglass's liberty message to ignite America's passion for liberty because they've been socially and Marxist indoctrinated. And the best, most effective liberty message to defeat Marxism, I contend, is Frederick Douglassism.
Yeah.
Hey,
Wow.
Carl, I've noticed,
He's a game
I've
changer.
noticed, yeah, I've noticed that I'm going to broad brush, I know, but it seems like nearly anybody in America under 45 has an allergy to accurate history books. And so for somebody like yourself who sees something and says, "Wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. I'm going to research and dive into this and figure out how can we develop millions more of people like you, especially when it seems like our academia, like you said, you were at a traditionally black university. You're supposed to
Mhm.
be getting the best top level education there, and yet there were vast facts, historical facts that were missing. How can we encourage people to find that more accurate historical perspective in order to reveal these answers?
That's a very good question. And what I teach is this. Before, and I think you got to start with Frederick Douglass because he wrote about so many things we're dealing with. But before you read any biography on Douglass, read his autobiographies. Read what
Mhm.
Douglass says about himself, and don't
Mhm.
just read the autobiographies. He wrote 3 of them, but read the writings of Douglass.
Mhm.
Philip S. Foner, Foner. If you go to Amazon, he has a selective writings of Douglass's writings and speeches. The left has not gotten to the position yet to rewrite Douglass's writings, not yet.
Mhm.
So go back and read that for yourself. And then also Yale University Press has a collection of Douglass writing called the Frederick Douglass Papers. There's 2
Mhm.
volumes, pretty expensive, about $300, almost $300 per volume. I read all that. So once I started reading what Frederick Douglass had to say,
Mhm.
that really accelerated my learning because Douglass just said the same thing that the founding father was saying. But you can't play the race card on Frederick Douglass. Douglass wasn't a racist. He was a victim of racism.
Mhm.
Douglass wasn't a slave owner. He was a slave. But in his writings and in his speeches, Frederick Douglass affirmed the founding fathers and he affirmed the Constitution. And that's what the left has absolutely no answer for, and they never will. So get into the writings of Douglass first. Read his autobiographies. And I got to say,
Mhm.
after you do that, or simultaneously, you got to get a copy of K. Carl's book and read that too.
Amen.
That's
Mr. Carl, I had a quick question.
yes, sir.
When you look at the world, I mean, I was brought up in a home that, it was really not even about politics. It was just about core common sense, core American values. I mean, my dad was a working man. It wasn't about, it was always words said in the family to Rodney, don't be out here throwing rocks and busting people's windows out. And just basic core common sense about law, abiding, and then what do you think is the actual issue about what you're talking about, the Frederick Douglass point of view? How come that marketing, how come that PR isn't getting out there? And how can we help with a show like this and so many others? How can the truth get out?
I'm gonna answer the last question first. The way the truth has to get out, right, in my view, that each one of us, we got to become better messengers of liberty.
Mm-hmm.
We got to know how to have conversations with our family members and our friends and not confrontations.
Right.
We got to know how to win the narrative. We got to know how to be on the offense. And
Mm-hmm.
the best way to create an awakening is leveraging the the life of Frederick Douglass. Because see, what a lot of people don't understand, they don't understand socialism. They really don't understand Marxism unless you come from those countries. Americans here, because we live in a lap of luxury, we don't understand that. And we don't appreciate liberty. But when you give them a different metaphor, a slavery metaphor, and you leverage what Frederick Douglass had to say about slavery, then the awakening occurs, because the techniques of oppression used by the plantation slave master are identical to the techniques of oppression used by the slave government: Marxism, communism, socialism. Now, the first part of your question is, and I think I'm having a senior moment, Rodney. I think the first part of your question was what has happened over the years where that truth is not out there,
right?
And why they have not been elevating the story and the liberty message of Douglass. Because we have those, honestly speaking, in this country who want to tear down America, and they want to do it from the inside. And the way you do it from the inside, you don't tell people the truth. Because if I can keep the truth away from you, when I tell you a lie, you'll never recognize it.
That's right.
So when that happens, then you don't have a way to bring in other knowledge to challenge that, you're going to go right along with that. So there are those who don't advocate it. The left, they cherry pick Douglass, but they don't get into the liberty message of Douglass. Rodney, why do you think there's never been a movie coming out of Hollywood about Frederick Douglass?
Interesting.
Tupac got a movie. James Brown has a movie. Aretha has a movie. Because when you tell the truth and you get into the life and writings of Frederick Douglass, you got to tell the truth. Number one, he was a self-proclaimed Republican. And number two, he affirmed the founding fathers, and he affirmed the U.S. Constitution, which the opposition wanted to shred and do away with. That's why. And but that's why we got to become a better message of liberty. We got to stop using the word conservative, stop calling ourselves that. It doesn't work. It has never worked. We got to stop acting like we're insane, think we're going to get a different result by doing something we've been doing all the time. It ain't going to happen. If you get a chance, when you go to my website, diversityengagement.org, there's an audio clip on there from Rush Limbaugh. And back in 2018, doing a second hour of his show, the father of conservative talk radio made this comment, and I quote, he said, "Stop using the word conservative. Get rid of it. It doesn't work. Don't call yourself that." And where do you think he got that from? 6 years ago, I got a call from the Rush Limbaugh show. All they said was, we're watching what you're doing. We love it. Keep it up. And my message has been, get rid of the word conservative and replace that with Frederick Douglass Republican, and learn how to leverage the liberty message of Frederick Douglass. That is just that simple.
Do you think there's a problem with, it's just like you said, schizophrenic. I think there's a lot of schizophrenic people just in life, because 1 minute they're saying one thing, but they're doing something else. And I mean, it's like we have to get everybody moving in the same direction and say, okay, these are the facts. These are the things that are core principles. Me personally, just like even with gun control, people need to have the opportunity to keep their arms and to protect themselves. There's no doubt about it. Do we need to have greater checks on people and background checks? We need to have greater mental evaluation. I think a lot of problems that's going on in the world, I listen to people and I go, this is not anything more than a mental issue. That person has a mental issue. It's a fear of something, lies, stereotypes, but the whole thing is we've got to get people locked in on the facts so that everybody is moving in the same direction. Nobody's saying that anybody should have their weapons taken away, but there needs to be greater checks and boundaries. And we also need really aggressive outreach into the communities to stop people. If someone sees something, people need to start saying, hey, this isn't right. Get on the phone, talk to somebody. And the whole thing is because you could save lives. You could save your own family's lives with these things.
I agree. I mean, you said it well. I can't add to that, Rodney, because that's what we have to do. It's really those common values that make America great, that we have to revive America's commitment to those values that
Mhm.
make our nation exceptional. And those
Mhm.
values to me are those God-given rights
Yeah.
that other countries don't even consider.
Mhm.
Free speech, religious freedom, the right to keep and bear arms.
Mhm.
These are God-given rights. They're not given to us by some king.
Right.
Be taken away by a king. So
Right.
we got to ignite America's passion for liberty based on those values, because values unite, and that's
Mhm.
what's going to save this nation. Focus on those values and saying what Douglas said about those values.
Mhm.
Again, how can you win an argument with a runaway slave when he talks about his love for the Second Amendment rights?
Mhm.
Mhm.
His influence was very great, even in his own time. And
Yes.
I think it could be great again. I want to just share with you, there's a portion in your book here that was eye popping to me, and I want to share it with all of you. This is Douglas writing to his former
Mm,
slave master. So this is the
Mhm.
man under whom Douglas was a slave. The man's name was Thomas Auld, and Douglas wrote this to him in September of 1848. Now this is over 20 years before the Emancipation
right.
Proclamation.
Right.
All right, but Douglas was no longer a slave on the plantation, but he wrote this to his former slaveholder and said, I will now bring this letter to a close. You shall hear from me again unless you let me hear from you. I intend to make use of you as a weapon with which to assail the system of slavery, as a means of concentrating public attention on the system and deepening the horror of trafficking in the souls and bodies of men. I shall make use of you as a means of exposing the character of the American church and clergy, and a means of bringing this guilty nation with yourself to repentance.
Mm-hmm.
1 year later, just 1 year later to the day, in 1849, Douglas wrote to Auld again, and this in part is what he said. I have been told by a person intimately acquainted with your affairs, and upon whose word I can rely, that you have ceased to be a slaveholder, and have emancipated all your slaves, except my poor old grandmother, who is now too old to sustain herself in freedom, and that you have taken her from the desolate hut in which she formerly lived into your own kitchen, and are providing for her in a manner becoming a man and a Christian. This, sir, is good news. It proves that the agitation of the subject of slavery does not hinder, if it does not help, the emancipation of slaves at the South.
Mm-hmm.
1 year,
That's right.
just
Mhm.
1 year. Now, what was Douglas doing during that year? What happened in that year that made such a difference?
Well, Douglas was a public speaker. And basically,
Mhm.
what he says in that letter, if I can put it in K. Carl's terms, he said, look, because he said, I want you to free all 400 of your slaves. And until you do, I'm going to write about you in my book, which he did. I'm going to talk about you in my speeches. I'm going to call you out on Twitter and Facebook. I'm going to agitate you. And because
Mhm.
of Douglas's agitation and the power of repentance, that white slave master freed all 400 of his slaves within a year. And I make that statement strongly because that debunked this whole CRT that white folks are inherently racist and cannot be redeemed for being a racist.
Mhm.
Mhm.
This man freed all 400 of his slaves. That's when racism was at its worst. The racism in the United States today is pale in comparison to what Douglas dealt with.
When that man freed his 400 slaves, some of whom were Douglas's relatives, by the way,
Right, right.
not only his grandmother was there, but when that man freed all 400 of his slaves, this was still 20 years before the
That's
Emancipation
right. That's right.
Proclamation.
And
Can you imagine the social pressure on a white plantation owner 20 years before the Emancipation Proclamation?
that's right.
The pressure on him among his own people would have been, no, you can't you can't free your slaves, that will reflect negatively on the rest of us. It will make our own slaves want freedom.
Here's what's so important. That slave master, he did something that the founding fathers who owned slaves couldn't do. That guy, he wasn't worried about losing money. He freed them. Some of the founding fathers, they didn't free their slaves until the death of the founder. That's why the founders are tainted. If you're really serious about them being human beings and they got equal rights, go ahead and free them. Yeah. Don't worry about how much money you're going to lose. Look how much money you made. You didn't have a payroll to meet for 30 years. So that's the power of repentance. And that slave master, because of Douglas's persistent agitation, in other words, we got to get on politicians' nerves. I don't care if they got an R behind their name or they got to do. We got to get them. We got to agitate them to do right. And that's what Douglas is talking about. Douglas said, agitate, 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 and you bring them to repentance. And one thing about that letter, I got to get this out.
Sure.
What Douglas did, when Douglas escaped, he didn't write a letter to the master and say, you need to apologize to me for what you've done for me. Douglas showed love first and said, I forgive you for all the things you did to me. Douglas didn't take an arrogant role and say, you need to apologize. Get on your knees, white man, and apologize to me. Like the left is pushing, which doesn't work. That's not forgiveness.
Right.
Douglas said, I forgive you for all things you did to me. He brought him in. And he can't create more animosity. Because
that was one thing. Yes, that was one thing in the book that I found so fascinating and I love so much, was that his approach to the people who had effectively made themselves his enemy. You know, he didn't view them as his enemy, but practically speaking, they had made themselves his enemy. But his approach to them was not one of, no, I'm going to now stick it to you the way you stuck it to me before. He gave his enemies room for repentance.
As a matter of fact, Douglas never asked his former slave master for reparations. Douglas went out, he found his God-given gifts, his God-given talents. He took his obsession and he made a profession. When Douglas died, Douglas had $300,000 in savings. Back in 1895 when he died. That's over $20 million a day. Douglas, through his gifts, created his own reparations, his own wealth. Douglas is so powerful, Rodney. I mean, that brother's bad, man.
Yes. Yeah.
That's a bad brother. Not only did he keep Lincoln in check about the Constitution, and his writings opened my eyes, but that brother's life.
Yeah.
He did something that we haven't done today. That brother was a slave.
I have a quick question. Does it seem as though, I mean, what it seems to me is there's no principles greater than the principles of God and what the Holy Scriptures have laid down. You can't have crazy stuff and weird viewpoints in your head or in your life or in your speech or in your walk or in your service if it is challenged by the Word of God. And I think that's the problem. I think the problem that we're running into is that we are not using the measuring stick, which is the Word of God, because if you use that cuts it all out. I don't care how you justify it. Politics ain't terms, titles, none of that stuff means anything, because it has to be, is this correct? Is this correct for your brother, man? Is this correct for you? Are you doing the right thing? Are you fair? You know, and so I'm trying to understand it from a biblical perspective. That's how I try to run my life and my logic and my thinking. Because when I see the poor, you know, they say the poor will be with you always, but somebody needs to do something. You know what I mean? And I think about how we can make a difference. And I think that when you look at our nation, when you look at the leadership, you know, the things that we're being challenged with right now, what would the Lord say? I think that we need to kind of keep circling back to that.
I agree, because when you read the 10 Commandments, when you have those in your mind and your heart, that will stop you from committing a crime.
That's right.
But man's law, they punish you when you commit the crime. So having more man-made laws is not the answer. We got to have more God.
That's right.
We gotta have more godly principles. We gotta have that. When you take God out of the public scene, out of public schools, there's no moral compass now.
Nope.
So everything runs amok.
Mhm.
And now you bring other stuff in. It has nothing to do, and everything is always anti the spirit of God.
Right.
That's the problem. The problem is
Yeah.
the lack of God, and we need more of it.
Hey, Carl, one of the things that popped into my mind was going back to when I was a kid. I remember just over and over and over again. A little backstory: I grew up in a very diverse, poor community, so skin color really meant nothing to anybody because we were all just poor. But Martin Luther King, his teachings made room for all of us to relate and hold one another accountable.
Mhm.
And it seems like Dr. King's teachings have kind of been pushed the wayside. And so if we're now to elevate Frederick Douglass's teachings, how or what type of a role can non-Black people, whether it's myself, Nina, my 19-year-old son, how can we kind of meld together the lessons of Frederick Douglass with the methods of Dr. King?
Well, keep in mind, and if I didn't make this point earlier, I apologize. In terms of Frederick Douglass and be part of this Frederick Douglass Liberty Ambassadorship, it's not based on color. It's based on values. So if you create those life empowering values of Douglass just happened to be Black. He just happened to be an ideal embodiment of those conservative values. So we're not elevating really Douglass. We're really elevating the values that he embraced.
Mm-hmm.
And those values stand the test of time, and those values are universal.
Mhm.
So, and even with Dr. King was heavily indebted to the writings of Frederick Douglass, because the Civil Rights Bill that came forth in the 60s was based not only on the Civil Rights Bill that came out of Eisenhower in 56, but the first civil rights legislation was passed in 1875 by Ulysses S. Grant, when you had those first 7 Black Republicans serving in Congress. And so, and guess who their mentor was? The first 7 Blacks to serve in U.S. Congress were Black Republicans. The first 7 Blacks to serve in U.S. Congress were Black Republicans, and their mentor was Frederick Douglass. When I read that, I said, "Oh my gosh, these were the original Frederick Douglass Republicans."
Right.
And so, the focus is, to answer your question, Jefferson, we got to focus on the values and not the man.
Mm-hmm.
God just used Douglass in that way. We got to focus on the values, because that's what unites. That's what brings people in. That's what cuts across all ethnicities and colors and genders. It's all about the values, and that's how we're going to save this nation. And that's what we got to become better messengers of those values.
So, K. Carl, you spoke of agitation and the effectiveness of that in shining the spotlight on things. So what would that look like? I mean, are we talking about burning down buildings, marching, protesting, looting stores?
No,
what did Douglass do?
When we say agitation, we're not talking about violence.
Right.
Even when you've been offended, you don't have the right to be violent and tear somebody else's property up, like what they're doing. Those demonstrations we had a few years ago. They don't have the right to be violent and tear somebody else's personal property, but you do have a right to express your concerns, and you do it in a way. This is 2022. This is not the 17th. And so when we say agitation, we're saying to use the power of free speech, use the power of the press, use Facebook and Twitter to expose the truth.
I got a quick question, Brother Carl. What do you do? Because this is, I had some debates out here. I got friends in, NFL and, NBA and all, but we started talking about Colin Kaepernick. What do you say about a man who took a nonviolent approach? All he did was take a knee, and it cost him millions of dollars, and people attacked him. And I told people, I had some of my colleagues come at me, like, oh, they shouldn't have done that, and that was anti-American. And I was like, how do you know what he was doing? Maybe he was taking a knee. Maybe he was praying to God. Maybe he was praying for people. Do you know what was in his heart? Just the fact that that man got down on his knee, it wasn't hurt nobody, didn't attack nobody. It'd be different if he got down on his knee and literally lifted up his hands in an aggressive way to the nation. Then that people could have said, hey, now that wasn't cool. How do you, I understand agitation, but the time has come that there has to be some honesty, because if you talk to the average person, and then when you start talking about critical race theory, I've heard people say, well, I don't want my child to feel demonized or feel guilty of something that they had no part of way back. But we have to acknowledge that this was one of the greatest evils that ever hit this nation. Slavery and all of the other horrible things that have happened to Native American Indians, the Latinos, Asians, blacks. We've got to acknowledge the wrong. Everybody needs to come to the table and say, this is wrong. This will never happen again. And there were a lot of people, and so even when it came down to these statues being pulled down, I told somebody, in my opinion, they need to say, hey, no, they don't need to tear the statues down and all this other stuff. People who were pro-slavery and all that other stuff, great, let the statue stand. But there needs to be a placard right there to say, the United States government, we will never stand for this kind of ideological thinking. This man at that time thought he was doing the right thing. Years now, 2022, this will never happen to anyone again. We stand for the good things that he did as a war hero or whatever. Great, he did what he had to do, but his way of dealing with human rights issues and treating people fairly, this was wrong. We will never stand to it. Then people can go see Ulysses, whoever, and check them out, but they need to be able to read the adjustment of what we now find as what was wrong, because a lot of people don't know. They don't see it was wrong. Well, it was a business thing, and that's how America became America. Yeah, we had free labor. What about all the people who were set back? It was just like when you had Black Wall Street. The white people didn't say, hey, we don't want you on this side of town, get on that side of town. Black people went on the other side of town. They built stores, they built banks, they built schools. They had everything going. Everything was going perfectly fine. And then people said, that is an economic system that is getting strong. These people are going to be able to conduct themselves without our support. Oh, we can't have that. Go over there and burn it down. Burn the whole place down. And now the truth is starting to come out about that. When will we ever acknowledge the wrong? And after we acknowledge the wrong, it might not be reparations. It might be backing up and saying, okay, now it's a level playing field. So when people go to apply, they can get hired. There isn't this good old boy system that's blocking people out. Mm-hmm. It really needs to be across the board, because from what I'm seeing, I listen and I watch this whole thing, and I'm thinking that there needs to be an acknowledgement that this was the greatest evil that ever happened. And it's just kind of like with the Jewish people, with Hitler. They will never let that thing go. Right. They're not going to let it go. They're going to talk about that till the cows come home. And they built an economic system and a power structure that can't be stopped. They never will be stopped. I think that is one of the things that has affected African Americans. We were set back financially so far that, and then on top of that, even our own people, we have such a distrust and a willing to kill at will. That doesn't make any sense. I don't care. I don't care if there were free guns, if they were handing them out. I would never go out here and shoot anybody, especially another black man or black woman. For what? Just because somebody's standing on your block, you're gonna go and shoot them? I don't understand that. We got to get to the truth of the matter. We got to get all the way down to the core of the truth.
Well, you got a lot there on that plate. Let me pull some things.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to unload it. I'm sorry. Whew, Lord have mercy.
Let me say this I agree with you about statues. I contend, don't tear them down. Tell the whole story.
There you go.
Tell the whole story. You got Robbie Lee. Okay, put a picture of Harriet Tubman on the other side of the sidewalk. Tell the whole story. That's what's missing. That's what's always been missing. Tell the whole story. So I like that. You mentioned about Kaepernick. Here's my take on Kaepernick. I'm a former Army guy. So I know that when Kaepernick first started protesting, he sat on the bench. First thing he did, he sat on the bench. Some Navy SEALs got a hold of him. Some veterans got a hold of him and said, look, we understand you protesting, but at least, brother, at least kneel. At least take a knee. That's what we do in the Army. When you're in a combat situation, you're not standing. You're on your knee. You're on one knee and with the national anthem, or you're praying.
Right.
So here's my take on that. What Kaepernick did, we always have a history when Kaepernick said that what he was protesting was the abuse of police authority of a black man. So you always have a history where blacks who have a platform, they use that platform to bring attention to a social problem. His intent was, according to him, not to protest the flag, but use that time to bring attention to a social problem. What he did, Rodney, he took a play out of Douglas's playbook. If you go back and read Douglas's speech, "What to the Slaves of the 4th of July,"
right?
Douglas said in that speech. Now, at this speech, this was a prominent event. The president of the United States was there, and Doug was there speaking. Douglas did something called a double reversal. He started off praising the founding fathers for fighting for their freedom, fighting against the tyranny of Great Britain. Then he said in that speech, he said, look, you all are here celebrating independence when 4 million of your black brothers and sisters are enslaved in the South. So what to the slave is your 4th of July? Douglas went on to say, Douglas said, your anthem and your flag is a sham and a fraud. So Douglas didn't kneel, that brother said it.
Right.
Then he said, I need you to help me to solve this issue. Stop passing laws that put black folks back in prison for being a fugitive. Douglas said, clergy, stop preaching from the pulpit that blacks are born to be slaves because of Noah's curse on the children of Ham. So Douglas, I need your help. But the media blew it apart because what the media is in cahoots with the left, and what the left want, they want racial conflict. Right. They want racial strife. And so they create this narrative that he was kneeling to protest the flag. And to be honest with you, President Trump didn't help it. He said the same thing. He didn't help it.
Right.
And so that's how it went totally left and got away from dealing with the issue. Because black folks, I mean, even though percentage-wise, when you look at police brutality, it's really a small amount, but the media was sensationalizing brutality upon black men. So you got to deal with that. That's what people are hearing. That's what they're seeing on the news. You got to deal. You can't ignore that and start talking about statistics. Right. And so that's my take on that. And I'm a former Army guy. I'm a veteran.
Right.
I mean,
and
I remember kneeling. Praying.
But I have complete and total respect for the flag. But I just thought that was a very powerful statement that he made by taking the knee. He didn't say anything. He just
at cost. He has some cost.
Right, but see, the sad part to me is that cost. Do you see what I'm saying?
And that cost was going to come. He knew it was controversial.
But he was
willing to do it.
Yeah, and he took that opportunity to do that. But I think
what's missing though, Rodney, was he did it, but I never heard him have a solution till months later.
Yeah. Well, I mean, because he had to defend himself because it's the weight of the whole world came crashing down on him. He probably, I mean, he was drowned out by all of the comments and things So, and I mean, me personally working in the media, I work for a major media outlet out here in California. And the truth is, you're absolutely right. The media pushes things it's sensational. That's what drives ratings. And there needs to be a good news network
That's
where
right.
there is some real serious news telling the truth, building up people who are doing things in the community, in politics, that are making things right. There needs to be a whole
That's right.
network that is
Because
all about good news.
I contend that the mainstream media is
Mm-hmm.
in cahoots with the Marxists. And what Marxism wants to do in order to destroy America, they're not going to send soldiers to our shore or across our
Mm-hmm.
border. They want to destroy our culture. And what they want to do, they want to continue eternal strife between blacks and whites. They want to
Mm-hmm.
keep that. They want to keep it going because that's what splits the nation.
Right.
And so, and Douglas wrote about this.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what's going on. And what Marx is doing, they're telling us today, they're saying that racism is at its worst today than it was ever before, which is a lie.
Mm-hmm.
But what they're trying to do, they're trying to get people to think and realize, well, they're trying to get people to ignore the improvements we've had in race
Mm-hmm.
relations. They want us to ignore it. We've come a
Right.
long way. Come a
Yes, we have.
long way. I'm still in
Mm-hmm.
Alabama. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
not afraid of walking out my house, going to a grocery store or going to a restaurant. I don't go behind the restaurant to eat. It's
Right.
not the same like it used to be. But
Mm-hmm.
we still got to be vigilant because you
Of
still
course,
have
there's still
visual risk.
work to be done. There's
Oh,
still
yeah,
a lot
yeah.
of work to be done, and I think that it's a thing that, again, we have wasted a lot of energy, American resources. I mean, we need to get down to the business of making sure that when you say make America great again, I'm talking about we need to have jobs. We need to get these gas prices under control.
Right,
We need to
right,
make
right.
sure that there is fair and equitable justice across the board. And we need to get these factories and get people back to work and stop all of this influx of foreign goods here.
Mhm, mhm.
It used to matter when a product had made in America. These foreign countries, they could care less about a made in America badge because they're just cranking and loading America with all this stuff. And Americans are guilty at using this stuff because now it's like, I met a guy that bought tools at this company here. And I said, man, these are not your typical craftsman or snap-on tools. These are just some off-brand tools. And this guy was buying 3 of them. He goes, man, look, when I'm on a construction site, when this thing dies, it's so cheap, I throw it in the trash. I got 3 more in the truck. And I thought about that and I go, wow, what about those great American companies that used to make drills and power tools? Now we have all these foreign tools and they just buy them. And I mean, literally, the guy was buying them 3 at a time. He goes, when I'm on a site, I just throw it in the trash, grab another one, and keep going. And I'm like, wow.
That's why we got to have politicians in place who put America first, because
Right.
all this happened because of NAFTA. They took
Mhm.
all the manufacturing out of the United States and took it overseas. People lost jobs. They
Mhm.
lost careers. We lost ability to sustain ourselves, to make
Mhm.
our own items.
Mm-hmm.
Why do we have to do all that? No, you said something important. I thought about the other day. Why are Democrats and Republicans always at odds? Can they agree on anything?
Right. Right.
Can they agree on anything? And so I thought about, I was advisor of President Trump for 2 years. And so
Mhm.
when he extended for historical black colleges, he increased the funding and extended the funding to historical black colleges. Why did Democrats celebrate that? You know why? They don't want to give him any credit because if you give him any credit, black folks will start voting Republican.
Mm-hmm.
When President Trump had the lowest unemployment ever in the black community, community was under President Trump. Why didn't the Democrats celebrate that? Because if black folks ever get a clue that President Trump is doing this, it's over with for the Democrat Party. So I thought about this the other day. You remember when the Major League Baseball, they was going to have the All-Star game in Atlanta, and then the Atlanta legislators, politicians, Republicans that passed this voter right, they're trying to stop the fraud. So all these woke organizations, including Biden, they're saying, well, because the legislation was part of it to require photo ID. And Biden came out and said that it's racist, saying black folks can't, racist to black folks. Why is that we're the only ethnic group can't get off our butt? We can. That's a lie. It's not discriminatory to us. I got to have photo ID to doggone get cigarettes, which I don't smoke, or get alcohol. But what they did was that economic opportunity for the Major League Baseball in Atlanta. Atlanta is predominantly black.
Mhm.
They took that away from black folks in Atlanta, sent it to Denver, where you ain't got a lot of black folks.
Mhm.
And we had the same voting restrictions that they had just passed.
Worse.
Denver did.
Worse.
Yeah, worse.
Had worse. Yeah.
Very hypocritical. Sorry, I interrupted. Go ahead.
So we got to come together under these same principles, and we got people who in leadership don't agree with that. We got some who are for America. We got to identify who they are. We got some, and I might put it this way: the problem we have, and this is another subject, is we got elites in both parties want to make slave out of us. It's both parties,
Right?
The elites. That's the problem.
Do you think? Okay, and I understand, but do you think there's anything that the Democrats are doing right?
You're talking to a former Democrat. My gas bill is higher. I'm being honest with you.
No.
In terms of impacting my personal life and my money, I can't think of anything. I'm not for abortion.
Right.
I don't believe in same-sex marriage. I don't believe that we should take away a parent's right to decide what education opportunity is best for their child. I can't think of one. If you got one, let me know what it is. And if it's right, I agree with you.
Listen, this is great commentary, and that's why I asked the question. And again,
I'm thinking hard. Right. I'm thinking hard.
I know, because you're a highly intelligent man. Exactly.
I'm the kind of person. The Republican Party's bad, and the Democrat Party's worse. That's a quote from Frederick Douglass, by the way.
There you go.
So I don't know. I'm thinking. Because to me, it's not about a label. It's about values.
Right.
I spoke somewhere and I said, it's not about the donkey of the Democrat Party. It's not about the elephant of the Republican Party. It's about the Lion of Judah. It's about the lamb. That's what it's about. There's a quote that I love. One of the first of those first 7 blacks to serve in U.S. Congress was a guy from South Carolina. His name was I was going to say Rodney out of the Rippick, but his name was Robert Brown Elliott. His name was Robert Brown Elliott from South Carolina. Here's his quote, and this is what I agree with in my heart. He said, quote, "I am a slave to principles. I call no party master." That's it. I'm a slave to Christian principles. I don't call the Republican Party or the Democrat Party my master. I'm going to vote and serve in a way that shows my love and my allegiance to the God, Jesus Christ, I serve, period, without compromise.
Sounds good. Powerful.
So, y'all, we've only got like 1 minute left. And
it's been an hour already.
I know. See, that's why you need to come back.
I tell you what, I get a chance to talk to Rodney Allen Rippey, who had me in front of the TV all the time.
I told you he was track, Rodney. Told you.
It's an honor to meet you, and thank you for what you and I look forward to getting my copy and digging into it.
I know you got them in your suitcase, about 1,000 of them. I want to pull up one of those photos back in the day. Go ahead and autograph it.
We'll exchange, I promise.
All right.
You can be jealous. Mine is signed.
Yeah.
Wow.
And Rodney, you can put down Keith as my first name. Hey,
Keith. Okay, you got it. I promise.
Secret out.
So this is the book, y'all. Frederick Douglass, Republicans, the movement to reignite America's passion for liberty.
Let me say this. Rodney, I'm going to send you a book, but there's a way you can get a free copy of the book. My website is diversityengagement.org. Diversityengagement.org. You come to that website, go ahead and sign up for the course. I actually teach this whole engagement philosophy, and you get a free copy of the book, autographed copy of the book. And matter of fact, I'm going to the studio today, Rodney, to create some more videos because I don't like the quality of what's on there, but we're going to be updating that probably next week.
I got you covered, brother. I got you covered. Hey, I got you covered.
Be sure to check out diversityengagement.org. Be sure to come back to This Way Network Okay, Carl, thank you so much for your time. Love you all and love our
You
viewers.
made
Thank
my
you
day.
so
A
much.
chance to talk to all of y'all, but especially the great Rodney Allen Rippon.
Oh, thank you, man.
Y'all, thanks for joining us.
Appreciate
Be of good courage.
God
God
bless
is
you
with
all.
us. We are not alone.